All right, so in this lesson, we are going to do a visual analysis of Persepolis, or at least some excerpts from the graphic novel. All right, so when we are looking at a graphic novel, a comic type visual, we read it just like we would a book. So when we're looking at these panels, we would start here with this panel or this comic box with the protesters, and then we would read over to where the girls are entering the school, getting the veils as they're entering, and then we would go down and read the girls in the schoolyard. So that's how we would read this comic. Now, we're going to use the Optic Method of visual analysis. So I'm showing now on the screen the Optic Method student resource that your teacher has the ability to see. I'm going to move this so you can see. All right. Now, Optic stands for overview, parts, title, interrelationships, and conclusion. So we're going to go through this first panel together and look at each part of Optic so that you have a better idea of how to do the next two panels in this activity. Okay, so overview says we want to summarize the overall concept, explain the visual in just enough detail to provide the overall gist of the image. Imagine describing the image to someone who cannot see it. Okay, so when we go back to our panel, we're going to just describe basically what's happening. We would talk about the first comic box here has a group of angry protesters. They all have their fists raised in unison. They are obviously protesting something that is up here to the right. Then we would move over. This box, the second box, has schoolgirls entering into the schoolyard. We have a character that is looking out. If you read the entire novel, you'll know that this is our main character of the graphic novel. And then we would move down and describe all the girls are in the schoolyard playing with their mask, or their not their mask. We're worried about masks now in 2020, but they're playing with their veils. Okay, in ways that they're not being asked to be used. So when we come down to our overview, okay, we are going to just basically describe what's going on, what we just discussed there in that conversation. All right. Our next part of the optic is to describe the parts. It says that we need to identify the visual elements that make up the entire composition. Enter the identifiable objects such as buildings, shapes, icons, people, etc., as well as more abstract visual elements like colors, textures, typefaces, organizational layout, groupings, patterns, etc. So when we go back to our panel, scroll the wrong way. All right. The first thing that I notice in the parts, first, it's divided into these three boxes. So that breaks it down for us pretty easily. It's not one whole painting like, say, Washington crossing the Delaware, where we're looking at the different parts. This is already divided for us because it's a comic. The first thing I would notice in our first box is the contrast in color. Everything here is black, besides the faces and the fists. And we see that the people, the outline of the people is in white. So obviously, this is something that is a negative, that they're protesting something negative. If you read up at the top, it discusses how this was later called the Islamic Revolution. So we see all of the protesting going on here. I would then move over to this box and talk about how we have the girls entering the school. We have a teacher who is here handing out veils for the girls to put on. And then we have the main character here looking out and watching the girls come in. She's kind of seeing this happen right before her eyes. And then I would move down to the third box where I would describe what's all going on. We have a girl who's complaining because it's too hot for these veils. We have a girl here who is acting like a monster chasing this girl. We have two girls here playing horsey, giddy up. We have this girl who's taken the veil from this girl here, and she's now jumping rope. And to me, the one that sticks out the most is this young girl back here who says execution in the name of freedom. Obviously, she has been watching the news. She has been paying attention to what her parents have been saying, because she's playing revolution back here. She's not playing horsey or monster or jumping rope. So I think that it's clear that we see that going on. Okay. Our next part of Optic is the title, T. It says explain the title and the creator. Use the name of the piece and describe the creator, artist, to analyze the message the artist may have been trying to convey. Understanding the title and author can provide clarity, historical context, and meaning to a piece. In this lesson, we have this background information here from Satrapi, the author, and she goes through why she wrote this graphic novel. So that could help you answer these questions. This is from a chapter entitled "The Veil." It's not this little part's not the veil, but the entire chapter is entitled that. So I would discuss how the veil obviously plays a huge part of this whole chapter and the panels that we're looking at here. So that would be how I would handle title. Okay. It's not, you can't go in as detail as you would once again, like George Washington crossing the Delaware, because the title there is depicting one painting and we don't have really anything else to go with. Here we have more information that's missing because this is an excerpt from a graphic novel. All right, let me scroll the right way. All right, the next one is the interrelationships. And to me, this is, besides the conclusion, the analysis portion of it, this is the most important part. Here we're looking at how the parts relate to the whole picture. So we're going to look at how the different things that are there in those three separate boxes work together. Look at the items in the visual holistically. That is to say, see how all of the combined elements together make for interesting meanings. How do the colors, buildings, shapes, locations, and so forth combine to make for an interesting communication and read? So when we are looking at this, what do we see working together? Well, obviously, when we're looking at this panel, okay, we know that it's a story, okay? So we read it from left to right like we talked about at the very beginning of the screencast. So we see the revolution caused the students to have to wear masks, which caused the girls, being young girls, to not use them correctly. It's very comparable to what we're dealing with now in 2020 with the mask and how elementary kids are going to be using the mask and not wearing them like they're supposed to be. So think of it that way. But we see here this protest, their fists are raised in unison. They are all angry. You don't see anybody smiling in this picture. They are all protesting the same thing, and we see that by how they are looking in this direction here. Then we move over into the school, and we see our young girl, our young Satrapi, because this is an autobiography of her experiences. We see her watching the girls come in. This is a direct effect of this. So it's working together that way, and we see how the girls really don't know how to handle this. They're just doing what the teacher's instructing them, which then leads to our final box where, she says, we didn't really like to wear the veil, especially since we didn't understand why we had to. You have adults protesting, and the effects of that, goes to the children having to wear these veils in the school. And these are not babies. These are middle elementary, maybe lower middle school kids. So they've been going to school for a few years, and this is something new to them. So they don't appreciate it. They don't know how it's working or how it's supposed to work, and why they're having to do it. So the story shows how the cause of this is here. So when we're writing this part of the optic, we're going to explain how they all work together. All right. And then the final box is the conclusion box. Conclude with a strong analysis. Now that you've described the many pieces of the visual, you're in a position to make interesting claims about the visual as an entire composition. Provide an analysis that gives insight into what the visual may be trying to portray. Now, this activity is going to ask you to make a claim based on what you're seeing. All right. So one example of that claim could be that the actions of adults have a direct effect on children. Because here we are, we have adults that are protesting, and look at the effects it's having on their kids. And obviously, I would need to support that with the evidence from the from my visual here. So I hope that helps you understand, and good luck on the rest of the activity.